Hi there, I'm Timothy Von Rueden, better known as Von Art Online, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how to create 5 sources of revenue to find financial stability as an artist nowadays. I think most of you would agree if I said that a lot of us weren't taught a lot about finances growing up in school. Most of what we learned were from our parents, our peers, and now as we get older, from external sources like the internet and YouTube. And this is definitely a problem in the art world and a lot of the artists that I talk with, and hence why there's even a phrase, the starving artist. But thankfully, on the bright side, it's never been easier to generate income as an artist. A lot of it is just figuring out what avenues you want to take to make that money. So if you couldn't already tell, this video is definitely going to be leaning more on the business side of art. And if you're not looking for that right now, I would definitely click away. But if you're sticking around, then let me tell you a story of how a Lyft driver completely changed my perspective on how to find financial stability. So I travel to a lot of cons, and I often don't have my own car with me, so we will have to do Lyft and Uber to get from place to place. And in one case, we had this older Lyft driver who just happened to be a retired millionaire who was just bored of not doing anything, so he was doing Lyft on the side to pass the time. We were having this conversation back and forth for a while, and it wasn't that long of a time, but it was definitely enough where it felt impactful for the words that he did part upon us. The biggest lesson that he mentioned that really stuck with me is the topic of today's video, which is finding 5 sources of revenue to find that financial stability. He was talking about how you really only need 4, but the 5th one is there in case one of the first 4 kind of falter. He said to think of it like a table, and if you want to build something on top of it, you're going to need a solid foundation. And if you only have 3 or 2 legs to do so, it won't hold up. So if you want that extra security measure, you really should focus on having 5. He said that you should be able to lift your hand and name all 5 without having to think about it too long or too hard. And he said you can kind of think of it like your thumb being the biggest source of income and your pinky being the weakest. He then asked us what were our 5 sources of income, and admittedly, I didn't really have enough confidence outside of my convention earnings to list anything besides that. So I didn't want to embarrass myself, so I just threw YouTube and freelance on there, even though I was certainly not making more than, let's say, like $100 a month combined on those 2. I couldn't even pretend to have more, so I told him those 3, but admitted that it was really only 1. He laughed and told us it was normal for people our age to only really have one source of income, and typically this is done with a full-time job. And most people can rely on that one source of income for their entire life, so there really is no need to diversify. But he was saying that if you don't want to have a 9 to 5 the rest of your life, then you need to diversify. And this became incredibly evident back in 2020 when the pandemic shut down all the conventions. A lot of my art friends that didn't have these different revenue streams found it very hard to pivot, and it was incredibly difficult for them at that time. But because I was able to take this guy's advice back in 2017 and immediately apply it, when conventions shut down, I was able to rely on the other 4 to kind of hold up my foundation. And I never would have thought that conventions wouldn't be a source of income for me for almost a year and a half. And he was right. And I swear I still think about that philosophy when I talk to other people about business, and especially about how diversifying can be such a lifesaver. So let me share my journey on how I found my 5 sources of income, and maybe that will spark some inspiration for you on finding your own 5. So for me, my first choice was an obvious one, conventions. And this was generating not only the biggest amount of income, but it was also roughly where I was putting 90% of my time outside of actually doing the art itself. And it helps that I actually enjoy doing conventions. So for me, it didn't really feel like a job. I mean, it does from time to time, especially when you have back-to-back conventions. But for the most part, I actually genuinely enjoy being there. And this is important to keep in mind while you're figuring out what your 5 are, because if you're not having fun at all, what's the point of navigating trying to force something to work if it's never going to? But for me, I knew it was obvious. Conventions were going to be my number 1. It was just figuring out where the rest would be. So this was back in 2018 when I decided to put my plan into action and start looking at what my other sources would be. And not only figuring out what they would be, but how to continue to have them grow without my convention stream taking a huge hit. So my second choice was an easy one to make, and this is online sales. I was already traveling and promoting my Etsy shop, which had very little on it at the time, but I wanted to make my own website shop so that I could cut having a third party and make more of a profit margin per purchase. So I made a Squarespace website and essentially just copy and pasted what I already had on Etsy. And then if there was anything that was left out that I was selling at conventions, I added that as well. So if you wanted to find anything from me that you could find at a convention, you could also find it online. And that's the nice thing about having online shops. Often it's not really you having to promote the shop, it's people just kind of finding it on their own by following you on social media. And with the right art tactics, I know some of my art friends make most of their money on online sales. And this could be from opening their shop only once or twice a year, to really pushing big sales, to being really smart and knowing that a holiday sale could really push some extra numbers. Whatever it is, just know that this could definitely be a really big one for you if you just know where to put the time and energy into it. Moving on to my third choice, which is Patreon. Now, some artists like this, some artists do not. But I think it's a great way to receive residual income without having to put too much extra layers of work into it. I will say that this is something that I fumbled with, and I know a lot of artists do with Patreon, but if you just experiment enough, you'll kind of learn how to navigate it through trial and error of what works for your platform and what you're able to offer. And over the years, I finally kind of figured it out of what people want to see, and it's just more of what you have to offer. And sometimes that's as simple as letting them see more shots along the way as you're creating each piece. So when I think of Patreon, I think I use it in 4 ways. The first is having a physical reward every season. And this is something that took me a while to navigate what I'm comfortable with, because I definitely can't do once a month, and twice a year just wouldn't seem worth it for someone. So instead, I usually make a print or a pin or something that I can send as a physical reward every 3 months. The second is letting people see behind the scenes. I just have to take a picture of the progress that I'm making on every illustration I do, and I just post on Discord, and people seem to like that. The third is having timed releases. So it could be making videos and letting people watch it a month before I release them publicly, or it could be releasing originals as a first come, first serve for my Patreon backers before also releasing them publicly. People like the idea of exclusivity when it comes to timed releases. And lastly, having a way of communicating with the artist directly. And most of the time it's through a Discord community. And I really like that aspect of it, because in doing all of that, you create more of these established connections with your Patreon backers. And oftentimes these backers are the people who like your art the most. So in that way, it feels like this personal connection that people are able to have with you and also support you at the same time. This hasn't been everyone's experience working with Patreon, but I've definitely had more of a positive one, so I'm going to continue using it. Moving on, my fourth stream of revenue should be pretty obvious if you're watching this on YouTube, and that's because it's YouTube. I was already familiar with recording and editing videos back when I worked with CG Cookie. And for this channel, I would upload a video maybe every now and then, but I really didn't put a lot of time and effort into it. I mostly focused on live streams, which were great, but they can be rather exhausting. And a lot of people see them as too long of a format to want to sit through, and they would much rather have like a 10 to 20 minute video bite of what was actually the content of the video. And I'm not saying that live streaming isn't worth it. This could easily be maybe one of your 5 sources of income. But for me, I definitely find more comfort in creating pre-recorded videos than having to do a live stream. Anyways, even with the more minimal effort I was putting on YouTube, I was still making between $100 and $250 a month, because the popular videos were just carrying it through. Knowing that my Patreon was doing better, I figured YouTube would be a really easy companion for Patreon and to release videos a month early. And that way I could make content for both with only having to put effort into one. And having this integration between your different sources of income is great, because then it like reverberates. If one does well, it'll help another one do even better. And another great thing about YouTube is it doesn't rely on this fast content producing strategy, where a lot of social media content that you create nowadays, it is digested and it's over within the first 24 hours, if not the first hour or two. But on YouTube, you could make a video and have it go viral 3 years later. So the value per video is way higher than the value per post on any of the socials. So we'll see how it goes for me on YouTube, but I'm having fun making these videos, so as long as that's happening, I'm gonna stay on this platform. And finally, we have my fifth source of income, which is my chaotic source of income. This can range from freelance work to a new Kickstarter campaign, or maybe a commission, which is rare, that I open up from time to time. No matter what it is, it's very inconsistent. Where the other four, I can kind of track and rely on what I think they'll make per month. This fifth one, it's very timely. It's not something I can rely on. That doesn't mean that they can't be great though. Like I had a Kickstarter campaign that broke 100K and that surpassed most of the other sources of income for that entire year. So while it's rather inconsistent, I'm okay with that because I know I can rely on the other four to give me that assurance. And those are my 5 sources of revenue. And I'm telling you that this has really helped me since I left my full-time job, because now I'm never too nervous if I don't have a convention that month or if my online sales dip for a little bit, because I know I have those other sources to help me out during those times. So try and think of what your 5 sources of income would be. And it's okay if you can only come up with like 2 or 3. I think it's good to start thinking about these things and how to diversify where your money is coming from. I only gave my 5 ways, but there are so many different ways to make money nowadays as an artist. You could sell digital goods like Photoshop brushes or phone wallpapers. You could be a podcaster, or maybe you want to work more with the community and do things like murals. And some of these sources that you're thinking of might not even be art related. Like maybe you want to get in the housing market, or maybe you want to rent out a space on Airbnb. There really are so many ways to create these avenues of revenue, and it's just up to you to figure out what is comfortable without it being like this painful process of figuring out where your money should be coming from. Like let's say you thought YouTube would be something you're interested in, and then as you're going about the recording process and editing, you find out that you absolutely hate it. Like it is something that is just so awful to participate in that you would rather do anything else. Then maybe this isn't one of your 5 sources of income. More often than not, though, I find the opposite to be true. I find that when artists start dipping their toes into these other pools, they end up loving one of them and it becomes one of their sources of income. I don't think this Lyft driver really understood how much of an impact he would have on me that day. I hope he knows how much it's helped not only me, but all the people that I've told over the years, because I've had people come up to me and be like, hey, that story that you told about that Lyft driver, it really helped me figure out what my 5 sources were and how to start branching out into them. And I know that talking about finances can sometimes be overwhelming and not the most fun thing. But if you can find ways to find more enjoyment within it and see it more as a game, I think it can be more fun for you. And that's how I've established my own relationship with money without it being soul crushing. So let me know down in the comments if these type of videos are something you'd want to see more of. And I want to kind of hear, what are your 5 sources of income? And if you only have like 2 or 3, where are you trying to build into to establish the remaining ones? And as always, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can back my Patreon and join the exclusive Discord community, as well as see every illustration that I create from start to finish. See how I'm tying that source of income with this source of income here on YouTube? Always try to keep that in mind. Thanks again for checking out this video, and you can watch more right now.